Today, we're diving into the invisible lines that shape political power. We're taking a forensic look at the brand new congressional maps in Texas, all through the lens of a new analysis that makes some pretty explosive claims.
So think about it. How do you actually draw a political map? It happens every 10 years, and it literally defines our representation in government. But the tools? Well, they aren't always just a pencil and a computer. As we're about to find out, sometimes the most powerful tool is data.
There's this new forensic analysis of the latest Texas congressional map, and it makes a really powerful argument. It says that when those lines were being drawn, the biggest factor, the key variable, wasn't about which political party would win. It was about race. Let's see how they build that case.
Okay, so first, let's just set the stage. Every 10 years, after the census, states redraw their political maps to account for how populations have shifted. After the 2020 census, Texas got to work redrawing its 38 congressional districts. Now, on the surface, that's just business as usual, but the analysis we're digging into argues that the outcome was anything but standard.
To really get what this analysis is all about, we need to zoom way in. We're going to the Houston area to look at what the report calls a dramatic swap between two districts that are right next to each other. This is where the story gets really fascinating.
Let's look at how things used to be, the before picture. Under the old map, you had Congressional District 9, or CD9. It had a pretty significant population of Hispanic citizen voters, but not a majority. Then, right next door, you had CD29, which was what's called a supermajority Hispanic district. A real stronghold of Hispanic voters.
Let's put a number on it. The metric we're looking at is HCVAP. That stands for Hispanic Citizen Voting Age Population. It's super important because it measures who can actually vote, not just the total population. So in the old CD9, the HCVAP was 26.5%. Not a majority, but definitely a voice. Now, keep that number in your head.
Now, let's look at its neighbor, CD29. Its HCVAP was a massive 67.1%. That made it a genuine supermajority district, one of the most powerful Hispanic voting areas in the whole state. So, just to recap, we've got one district at 26.5% and the one right next to it at 67.1%. So, what did the new map do?
Well, this is what happened. The numbers completely flipped. It's wild. CD9, the one that was at 26%, shot all the way up to 50.5%, just barely over the line to become a new Hispanic majority district. So what happened to CD29? The old 67% powerhouse? It got cracked. It plummeted to just 43%, completely losing its majority status. This wasn't just some small adjustment. It was a total demographic reversal.
So what in the world happened here? The analysis we're citing says this was absolutely not an accident. It argues that this is a textbook example of a very well-known and very controversial redistricting strategy.
It's a tactic called packing and cracking, and it's a form of gerrymandering. Packing is when you shove as many voters from one group as you possibly can into just a few districts. Sure, they win those districts by a landslide, but it wastes their votes and weakens their influence everywhere else. Cracking is the opposite. You take a big, cohesive group of voters and you slice them up, spreading them across many different districts so they never have enough power to form a majority anywhere.
The author of this analysis, Eduardo Pedregon Jr., doesn't mince words. He calls it, and I'm quoting here, a textbook packing and cracking racial gerrymander. The argument is that the map drawers cracked that supermajority in CD29, and then they packed just enough of those voters into CD9 to create a new but much weaker majority. So on paper, the number of Hispanic majority districts didn't change, but their overall power, that's a different story.
And the report claims this tale of two districts in Houston, it wasn't a one-off thing. It was just one piece of a much larger strategy. A strategy designed not just to move voters around, but to stop a powerful demographic trend dead in its tracks. So you have to ask, what was the motive? Why do all this? The analysis concludes that the goal was to preemptively stop the growing political power of Hispanic voters across the entire state. In other words, the map was allegedly drawn to prevent districts that were naturally on the way to becoming Hispanic majority from ever getting there.
And the report says the evidence for this wasn't just in Houston. It points to a pattern across the whole state. Look at these numbers. Beyond that massive 24-point drop in CD29, you could see at least 5 other districts where the Hispanic voter share was cut down significantly, some by more than 10%. The analysis presents this as proof of a systematic plan to dilute Hispanic voting power across the map.
Okay, stick with me here, because this is where the analysis gets really interesting. The report brings in a second way of measuring this, SSVR, which stands for Spanish Surname Voter Registration. Now, this looks at who is actually registered to vote, not just who is eligible. And when you look at it that way, the number of Hispanic-majority districts actually dropped. It went from 7 down to 5. That's a net loss of 2 seats. So why do these two different metrics tell two different stories?
This difference is at the heart of the report's most provocative claim, that the map drawers were essentially using 2 sets of books. The argument is that they used the citizen data, the HCVAP, for the real work, for engineering the districts to control the outcomes. But for public consumption or for legal challenges, they could point to the voter registration data, the SSVR, to defend their map. It's a pretty stunning allegation of a statistical bait and switch.
You know, when you put all of this data and analysis together, it forces us to ask some really big fundamental questions, not just about maps, but about what fair representation even means in a democracy as diverse and as fast-changing as ours. So what does this actually mean for a voter on the ground in Texas? What are the real-world results of these lines on a map? According to this report, it fundamentally changes the balance of power, and it affects the ability of a growing community to make its voice heard.
And all of this exists within a legal framework. I mean, the Supreme Court, in huge cases like Shaw v. Reno, has ruled that race can't be the number one predominant factor when you're drawing these lines. But this forensic analysis comes to the conclusion that in this case, race was the predominant factor, and that other principles, like trying to keep districts geographically compact, took a back seat to engineering the racial makeup.
So let's just boil it all down to the single most crucial point. The core argument of this entire forensic analysis is this. The primary tool used to draw this new Texas map, it wasn't about party. The report claims the #1 sorting mechanism was race, used to achieve a very specific political result. And that leaves us with one last big question. This analysis suggests these lines might have been drawn to predetermine who wins and who loses, all based on race. So if a map can essentially decide an election before a single vote is even cast, what does that say about the power of your vote? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.